All right, we are live. Today is Thursday, August 26th, and this is our weekly developer check-in. Before we get going on all the exciting things in the agenda, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. I am Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California. I'm really excited about everybody's enthusiasm and the huge flurry of work we've seen lately in the issue queue, so thank you everybody for all of that. Let's turn it over to Olaf.
Hello, I'm Olaf from Hamburg in Germany, and I don't know what to say, so I pass to somebody else. Let's take Joseph, who doesn't hear me, I guess.
Hi.
So,
Sorry. Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm a backend web developer. Yeah. Luke.
I'm Luke McCormick in San Ramon, California. I've been doing some more coding recently, so maybe I'll try to chip in with something sometime soon. Let me throw it over to Justin.
I'm Justin Christopherson. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I volunteer with infrastructure things when I can. And pass it over to Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim. I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota, and yeah, going to keep it short and sweet today. Who's left? Greg?
Greg, yep. Did you say Greg? Yep.
Yep, Greg.
I'm Greg. I'm joining from Greece. Really excited about working in the issues. I haven't been doing that for a long time, and it's good to be back. And I'll pass it to Andy.
All right, Andy Shillingford. I help around the backdrop. Sorry, I wasn't listening. Don't remember what I was supposed to say.
Nothing. Where you from?
Do what I can.
That's it. Maybe I think Nate is the only left then.
Yeah, and I'm Nate Lampton. I'm a quick sketch on the internet from Oakland, California. I think that's the first time we've made a full circuit without accidentally calling on someone twice. So with 9 people, that's great. All right. Let's see. Actually, Jen, I'll pass it back to you for a minute, and before we get into some of the other items.
Sure. So we have a couple of new contributed projects this week: Field Visibility Condition and SpamBot. Andy, thank you for working on SpamBot. I'm very excited to get that on backdropcms.org. And then let's see, there are a couple of new applications in the contrib queue, which I just wanted to point out is very exciting. We've had a bunch of people who've been pretty enthusiastically moving stuff over. So, yay. All right, back to you, Nate.
Okay. Well, a couple of meetings ago, we started doing a new policy where we have a forum post each week that is posted to forum.backdropcms.org. And in there, we solicit ideas for discussion for the next weekly meeting. And there was a couple of posts in there that listed a number of items for discussion. Some of them got discussed in the previous meeting, so I'll just note what those ones were. And if you are interested in that discussion, you can go back and watch the outreach meeting that was prior to this one. The first one is better default positions for the breadcrumbs on the installation of new sites, issue 4113. That was discussed in the previous meeting. Next up is config recipes, issue 3763. And I think, yeah, the question that we have here is what can we do for the next release and how can we promote it as part of the next release? So config recipes, the meta issue is issue 3763, but I think as far as what we're talking about for 1.20 is this blocking issue 3224, which is the module config needs to be synced on, the config needs to be synced on module install. And that issue we've been working on this past week. Doc Wilmot has filed a number of updated pull requests, incorporated some feedback. We've got some reviews. on that issue. And let me check what the very latest of that issue is. Yeah, looks like most recently, Tim, you and Andy have been going back and forth. Maybe one of you might actually be the better person to give it the update on the status of that issue. I'll put forward you, Tim, first as a candidate.
Sure. Basically, I think the problem was that there was a bug in core that when you enabled a module that had config files, that the database tables weren't being created. Andy created a pull request which solves that, and I created some simple like config recipes that basically just add like a content type and a view, and have tested it, and it seems to work. So, in theory, just by fixing that other bug which already existed, we've made something of a config recipe possible. But the next decision, but we never really decided what we wanted config recipes to look like. So now we kind of got to decide if this is really what config recipes should be, and or how do we manage them? How do do we have do we have a new project type on backdrop.org and blah blah blah? And I don't know if we'll be able to make those decisions in the next couple 2 or 3 weeks before release. Did I miss anything, Andy?
No, I think that sounds about right. Okay.
Yeah, there's a technical concern in there that the latest pull request has made some comments on about what happens when you disable and uninstall the module, like what happens to the config, the field related config when a module is uninstalled. And the current setup is that we have an exception in the, maybe not an exception, but we're changing the way the field sync config sync works, that if the database tables are already there, it just ignores them rather than failing to install. It just says, oh, I don't need to install the field config or the field database tables because they're already there. And so that's kind of a cheap workaround to make it so that you can disable and even uninstall a module, but leave the fields in place. But then when you re-enable the module a second time, it will again import the config out of the config directory, but it will leave your current data alone. And that's kind of a weird behavior, but yeah, it doesn't bother me too much in the way that
I have one concern.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if the time between disabling and re-enabling the module passes, and then there's schema updates, what happens there with the existing data? How do we? I mean, we need to find a way to keep track of the schema version that was there when the module was uninstalled, so that we know which updates we need to run just to be safe, right?
Yeah, so one thing is that the field module still owns like, let's say you have a module that creates a new text field or a new date field. The text module and the date module respectively are still owning that data, and the field is still there and the content type is still there, even though the feature module is uninstalled. So it's actually still maintained and still updated, and the schema is still kept track of, because another module actually owns that content type. So it kind of is maybe a little bit strange that the uninstall of the module doesn't clean up the content type, doesn't clean up the fields, which is good from a maintenance perspective. They can continue working on the site, and it's good from a data preservation standpoint, but it's a little bit strange that uninstalling the module doesn't actually remove everything that it created. So
I think that's kind of in line with other things we're doing in Backdrop, though, where like we require that you delete your fields manually rather than doing like a config sync removes them. So I think there's some stuff that, we tend to err in the direction of like, if you want to delete it yourself. And I think that lines up with this proposal.
So for what it's worth, that is exactly the behavior of the features module in 777.
Yeah, so I guess maybe this doesn't sound too bad. The all of that actually will continue working exactly as it is right now without this one fix that Andy put in. The fix makes it so that when you turn on the module a second time, it doesn't throw a fatal error or it doesn't fail to install
Well,
because otherwise it would try to import the field config and see that the table's already there, and it would just bail out and say, I can't create this field because the table already exists.
I think what it,
Go ahead.
sorry, I haven't looked at the latest version of this, but if I remember correctly, the behavior that I ran into when I made that issue was that what it does is it puts the config file in place and then checks if the config file exists, and if it does, doesn't create the table. And so it was failing to create the table. Well, actually, the original behavior before I started working on it was that it just didn't do it at all because it needs to run a hook to create the tables.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind if I just come in here, the error that you were seeing, Joseph, was because the module invoke, when you were invoking config create, you were doing that after the config save. So I just swapped those two lines and that fixed it. So
okay.
what was happening is that it was saving the config, and then when you ran hook config create, it was looking and seeing that the field config already exists, so it was stopping. So right now we swapped it so that it will do the config create first and then save the field. I think that's what the config import does. So I just copied that from there.
Okay.
So that fixed the error that you had there before.
That's an easy change, I guess.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and we do have test coverage now. Thanks for writing that and adding that into the pull request. And it seems like, Tim, you've confirmed that it all seems to be working as expected as well. So it seems like overall we're really closing in on this fix to make this possible. I think the only thing that we need to agree upon is, if the compromises that we've put in place are acceptable for the time being, we can probably change the way that this works in the future. This all is like edge case handling of uninstalling a module completely and then reinstalling it. Like if that's the scenario that is holding this whole thing up, it probably shouldn't be holding it up because it's just a strange scenario in the first place. I think we'd all prefer to have this capability, even if it has this edge case scenario, because right now, like, you can't get into that edge case scenario because the field config just doesn't do anything right now. So we're definitely removing a lot of the weirdness and getting it closer to where we want to be in this change. So yeah, that's looking really good. I think maybe we'll move on from that. I mean, there's other things around config recipes still, like what we do on backdropcms.org, how we surface them, how we categorize them, and all of that. But I think that that may be a discussion for after we get in this main underlying issue.
Question, what's left on that issue? So it's currently marked needs code review, and Nate, you'd left a code review on there with a handful of questions that I think have been addressed. Do you want to look at it again? I was going to do it a code review, but if you want to see it, maybe yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay.
your code review would be sufficient for me.
Okay.
I have already looked at it again, and it seems
Okay.
fine.
Before we move on to the other issues, can we discuss two issues that are config related so we don't go off that topic? One of them is Luke's first attempt, from what I can remember, to file a pull request. So the issue is 5146, and it solves a usability problem when people try to import config and then they get multiple errors. I think it's a great usability fix, and it's been TBC'd. I just would like to have that on the radar.
That's a great fix. This drives me nuts, honestly. Like hey, you need to turn on this module, and then you turn on that module, and then you try to import config, and it's like, now you need to turn on this module. yeah, that would be a great enhancement. And it looks like I haven't code reviewed this, but it looks like someone else has. It's marked RTBC already.
Yep.
Yeah, this is great. And it's only been open for 2 weeks, so yeah, great work on the collaboration here.
Yeah, and great. Thanks for holding there the fort, look, and persisting through the multiple code reviews and requests for changes all the time. But yeah, and then the other issue is 5163, which you have added it to the bottom of the list, which is it solves another similar issue, and we actually have a few other issues in the queue that might be solved because of that. So another thing is that if you try to move config from one environment to another, and the target environment doesn't have a module enabled, it will start complaining and throwing errors. So I thought that this issue doesn't exist in Drupal 8 and beyond, because they actually have they track whether modules are enabled or not in their config. And they have this core extensions .yaml file, which finds modules there and basically enables them for you. So the current pull request, what it does, it basically audits. There's an install, an update hook that basically audits the site and creates a YAML, JSON file with every module that is installed, enabled or disabled. Sorry. And then the bit that is left to be done is on the target system. When a comparison is done between what's in the system table and what's on that file, and then if there's modules that have not been enabled, it enables them for you. The question there remains, when do I do that? Do I do it on cron? Does it, ideally my expectation would be to be done automatically and not require a user action, at least for enabling, not disabling modules, which is not what I'm after in that issue. But yeah, I don't know, like, do I do it during Bootstrap? Would that be expensive?
So this is for doing a full import of the config?
Yeah, so yeah, before we go there, because you mentioned that there's two workflows. I know that most of you, like most of the advanced developers, they have a workflow where they sync the staging with the Active Directory. This basically deals with the simplest situation where there's only a person that uploads their config files into Active and expects things to work. So they go through the sync process, but then it starts complaining about missing modules. If the configuration included the list of modules that were there in the source environment and enable them, then you wouldn't have those errors. And that's what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah,
The code doesn't do, yeah,
That would,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joseph.
so that would fix it basically if you were doing a full config import, but it wouldn't fix it if you were only moving one file.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, partial import. I haven't thought about it. Yeah. Unless we have it so that doing a partial import always checks for that specific file. For config,
Yeah,
sort of like a special case.
Yeah, kind of the only protection we have in here is that when you import config, some module has to claim that config. And so if no module claims the config at all, then the config import completely fails. So if that module has a settings page, and saves one value, then the config import would fail entirely because there's no module available to validate that config is okay. So order of operations, Greg, you'd have to definitely turn on all of the needed modules in like a pre-phase and then do another step to actually run the validation on everything. And turning on a module, I think it would need to be done as a separate step. Like when we run the config import, it would need to like make one request, turn on the modules, and then we need to start over a second request, which we already have. Like, it's imported via batch API, so that would work fine. It would just need a a preliminary step to turn on the modules first, and then in the second and subsequent requests start importing the config.
Yeah, and if the
Yeah.
modules are missing from the code base, you could complain and say, hey, you're trying to enable a module because it will know it, which is not in the code base. If you so choose, it could download it if it's contrib and enable it. So there's a lot of possibilities to not throw errors. Rather than throwing errors, throwing messages and saying, hey, this module is sort of like enabled in config, but it doesn't exist in the code base. Would you like to download it? Downloads it for you, enables it, imports config. So basically, yeah, that's the functionality that I want to implement now. It seems simple, but I don't know the entry point. Like, where would I be doing that only during config import? Or
Probably.
Yeah.
So we were talking about having some way of keeping track of which config files depend on which modules. And Jen said that she actually puts an underscore modules in her config files already. So we could just do that and then say, okay, this, and then that would work even if you only imported one config file, because that one config file would know which module created it.
okay, how do we do that? Should we open another issue then and make sure that all core config files, those that exist and those that are generated, also have that underscore module? Should we do that then?
Yeah, there is an issue for that already. I don't think it includes a change to all of the, I'm not even sure there's a pull request, but it doesn't, I know it doesn't include all of the core config stuff, but this goes even crazier because all of the this would apply to all of config and contrib too. And so we can do it in core, but I think we just need to be careful that we check to see if it exists. Like, don't assume it's there, because it's going to take a while for contrib to get updated. Yeah.
Right. If you create a new config file through code and then save it, it will automatically fill in for you the underscore config name parameter and put it in your config file. So we could do the same thing with module. Just basically when you save a new config file at any time, check what module owns it and put that in there for them.
That's great, because then we can update any number. If it's a backdrop site running a module, even if the module didn't include it initially, we cleaning up the mess. That's a great idea.
Right.
Yeah, that would make the preliminary, like what modules need to be turned on, a lot cleaner, because right now the only way to do it is to run the validation and see what validation errors come back and say, oh, these modules are missing. And it would be much better if we could determine that information without running any PHP code, like from individual modules. We could just look at the files and say, what are the modules needed here?
Yeah.
I don't know, Greg, if that's absolutely needed for this phase or not. It seems like it would be beneficial. It might be easier to include it than not to.
Would people be confused if installing a module caused the module's code to change? Like it would show up in Git, it would say.
Well, we would just be changing. We would just be changing what gets put into the active configuration directory.
Oh, it wouldn't.
We wouldn't automatically change their code.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, that is considered acceptable too, because we have to do this all the time with module updates, that sometimes the config needs to change in the files, and we have update hooks that change what's stored in the config. And so it is expected actually that after you run update.php, you probably will have config changes on production. So that's the way that we have had to handle this in the past already. So it would be totally acceptable if we wanted to accelerate that process to have an update hook that retroactively goes through all of the active config and populates all of the module lines. That would be completely within the scope of things that we do normally.
I was about to say that. Were you, sorry, because I was drifted away for a moment, were you discussing about contrib config as well, or just core now?
We could populate it for everything already, because every module already has to claim a config file. If it's in the active directory, it's already claimed by a module, and we can do that by using hook config info and like finding like what module claims each config file and then populating that value.
But then I think that Joseph also mentioned that we also have config that gets, it's not an actual file that we copy over and install it or enable it. They're generated on the fly, right?
I think he's talking about the properties inside of the config files are generated on the fly.
Right. So if you go look at a config file on a live backdrop site, the first 1 to 4 properties will have an underscore in front of them, and we generate those 4 properties on the fly.
Okay.
Also, while we're talking about this, we just talked about config recipes, and now we're talking about issues with config syncing. There was an issue that was talking about like, how do we handle enabling a recipe that imports config for a module that's not enabled? And Greg, I think you said you thought that was okay, but because it wouldn't do anything until the module is enabled. But now we're going to run into this problem where if you go to do a config sync on that site, the sync will fail because the sync won't work unless the module is enabled. So I think whatever solution we end up arriving on for doing a config import enables modules, we need to make sure that also we can handle that for recipes. I don't know that needs to be like the recipes need to be blocked on that, but I think we need to figure out like maybe don't allow imports if the module is not enabled or enable the module automatically for the recipes.
So if you,
yeah.
well, you could have your recipe just depend on the other module.
Yeah.
And then that would fix that problem. But if
Yeah.
so, if you have a config file and in your module and you enable that module, it will check if there's already a config file with the same name, and if there is, it will just not import that file. So if you
the assumption there is that recipes are indeed another project type and they have a .info file, so we can specify dependencies, right?
yes, well, I think they should just be modules, but I don't know if we want to treat them differently in the UI or not.
I mean, right now they are just modules. So I think we should move forward assuming they're just modules, and then later if we want to make them into some fancy subtype of module, we can.
Tim, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. It's why I raised this discussion, and we have Laren is also working on sort of a side project which is specifically designed around paragraphs, but it's a kind of a recipes thing that doesn't treat them as modules. There are some pros to that and cons to that, right? And my fear, I feel like we can't announce a config feature that assumes that configs are modules until we've decided for sure that's the route we want to go, because I don't think we can just change what config recipes are 6 months from now, right? That whatever that decision we make now is, we kind of.
Well, I think like because they're modules now, 6 months from now, we're not going to not have modules.
Well, right.
It would still work in the future, but if we then define a new type, I think that would also be okay. So I think.
Okay. Right. Config recipes work. We have them to, as soon as this patch goes in. The question is whether or not we tell everybody, hey, we have this thing called config recipes and this is what they look like, right? If we do that, then it might be hard to change that later. That doesn't mean we can't go ahead and use them.
Let's hold off on the press release, but still do the feature.
That's my point. That's my point.
From a usability perspective, just kind of throwing out my impressions, the functionality of config recipes is so distinct from the general functionality of modules that I think it's a mistake to lump it with that. Like I think that was a misfeature of Drupal 7's modules, Drupal 7's features rather, module that it dumped in with modules and which is confusing and kind of unnecessary in there. I mean, they're not modules, so like they're not really doing the things that others. So even if for implementation purposes, if it happens to be they actually really are modules, I think from the perspective of the users, it would be good for us to actually hide that and keep them as a separate thing, and not let anyone have to worry about them being modules, unless they're actually fucking with them. I think a general user doesn't need to know that, and that's just confusing.
As in, you mean that the perception that modules means code and people are not coders, whereas recipes is a simpler thing.
Yeah.
Well, we can market it the other way around, that this is the simplest form of a module, and modules are not difficult in Backdrop anymore. So,
well, the module lobby will be in favor of that. But, you know, the other constituencies might have a problem with it.
Yeah, I think Luke, as long as I think we could do that as long as if recipes became their own thing, they couldn't execute PHP code. And I think that you could have a module that included, you know, a lot of functionality, and it would have custom hooks and things like that. And then that's really a module that has a bunch of pre-baked functionality, and that's just something you can do in Backdrop more easily now. But if we take this other route, then recipes would really be, there's no module file, there's no PHP code in it, because if it is executing PHP code, then it's a module. Like, I think that would be kind of the defining line, is that PHP
Sure.
code, if it adds functionality, it's a module.
So just your module, if you had a module, could you include a recipe in it, or do they have to be different?
Well,
Maybe we should hold off on-
then it gets into the
Right.
fuzzy area. Yeah,
The
like
way-
what do we call that? I don't
This
know.
is the-
Yeah.
This
The way
is a
that I
discussion
see it-
that
Later.
we
The way
need
that
to
I see
have,
it
but
is-
I'm not sure today.
the way that I see it is that recipes are the simplest form of a module that can evolve to become modules by adding PHP code and features eventually. So
Well, I mean, writ large, I'll go like philosophical on everybody for a second. But this is what computers are. Like ultimately, we're just throwing ones and zeros, and like it all, you know, it's all just ones and zeros anyway. So I mean, all this other stuff that we do is trying to simplify it and conceptualize it and make it be reasonable metaphors that people can use to understand some important piece without having to go 11100 or 11100. Like we're simplifying things all the time. So it comes up, for example, it's the same reason why you want meaningful variable names, right? Like it'll still function even if you give them terrible variable names, but yet it matters. Like it matters how people perceive it and what they think it is, and whether the first guess turns out to be correct.
And if
15
I'm not
minutes
mistaken,
left in this meeting.
Yeah. Tim, if I'm not mistaken, the way that you have tested recipes is by basically making a blank module. That's what you did, right?
Yes, but I want to talk about things right now that can get into the next core, and I don't see this discussion helping us get anything into 1.20 right now. So this is a much bigger discussion, and I think we have to come back to it later.
Sure.
Okay.
As fun as it is.
Yes. Oh, I really want to have it.
This is an incredibly important feature. Like it's groundbreaking once this gets in. So let's shepherd it in big or small steps, but let's get it there somehow.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next up, Jen, we've got this. Oh boy, we're gonna have a hard time fitting everything. User compare visibility rule, issue 4029. I don't know anything about this. Can you give us an intro?
Yeah, so this is a visibility rule that was in panels that didn't make it into Backdrop. It allows you to basically show something different, like when I'm looking at my own user page versus when I'm looking at someone else's user page. So it compares the person who's looking versus the person you're looking at. Though that use case is rather simple, the user interface for it is very convoluted because it's like user 1, user 2, and it doesn't really help anyone know what these entities are that you're comparing. And so I thought, Tim was testing it and he's like, I don't really understand what's going on here, which is fair. But I thought that now that we have relationships and layouts, I might be able to come up with a more useful example, because we can use the author of node relationship that's in core to have like a third user, and then you could compare user 1 and user 3 or user 2 and user 3 rather than just the two that my your own user profile with other users profile example. And I thought maybe if we had more examples of users to compare, we could maybe come up with some better terminology around how to explain to people what the things that they're choosing. So it's, I think it works as it is now, but the user interface is not intuitive. And so I'm hoping to come up with a better example that'll help us change the text. But I think functionality wise, it works. I don't know if it has a test with it or not. If it had one in panels, it might have one in the pull request, but I'll have to remind myself. I don't know.
Would it help if you were being descriptive about that instead of calling them user 1 and user 2, and you actually used more words? I know it's
Yeah, it's
good,
just,
but-
it's hard because without knowing the use case that people are building for, how to
Fair
describe
enough.
which user is which is hard. So yeah, I thought having maybe more examples of use cases might help us figure out how to name them more appropriately in an abstract way that still makes sense, which is very hard. Tim also recommended, rather than asking user 1, user 2, what we could provide is a very limited feature that's like compare currently logged in user with profile being viewed. But that would limit the functionality to only that one use case. Whereas right now, when you have the ability to use user 1, user 2, you can also compare to like a node author or any of the other users that we can have in core, like via relationships. So maybe it's worth asking everyone in this Zoom if you think it would be better to limit the functionality in order to make the user interface make sense to people. Or if we're going to expect that people will trudge through the interface and trying to figure out what this feature is.
So you mentioned this one use case, but there's more. Is the number of use cases a finite number, or can be limited to imagination? Okay.
Yeah.
It's limited.
Makes it hard.
It's limited by the number of relationships you have on your website.
Okay.
But the one use case that we are trying to put in core is like the most common one. So it might be even worth like doing the same thing twice, but doing it once with an interface that people understand and once with this like convoluted interface that you could use for a more sophisticated scenario.
Yeah, and under the hood, they would both be the same thing. Yeah, I think
Different
that's
form.
that's a good compromise, I think.
Okay.
That's where I'm leaning. Jack Wilmot, go ahead. You talk.
Yeah, I was sorry, I'm in and out of the conversation, sorry. But why isn't this good enough for contrib? Is this something that should be in core? I don't imagine that would be a very common something that would use commonly. Well, why did we think that it's something that should be in core?
It is pretty common that you want to show, like, especially if you take into scenario like the dashboard, right? Like a lot of times people will have their own dashboard, but you might want to see like, okay, these are the 8 things that I'm responsible for as editing content or whatever. But then I want to go see what's on like Bob's dashboard. And I don't want to see my tasks on Bob's dashboard. I want to see Bob's tasks on Bob's dashboard. And so you have to have some way to tell those pages apart. So it works for dashboards. It works for like actual profile pages. It works for anything where you have a website with a lot of authenticated users with higher levels of access. It becomes pretty common. It was in panels, and I think just overlooked, like a lot of our visibility conditions are missing. There's like a taxonomy term that's missing, a user, which is all the entities that aren't nodes just didn't make it into layouts when layouts went in. And so I think it's a valid use case. The edge casey ones where you need the really complicated interface aren't. So that I think is another thing where it's like, it's maybe we just put the one in. Another thing, a good question for everyone too is, where do we put all of the stuff that was in panels that didn't make it into layouts? Should we just have a contrib module called panels that has all of this stuff that was left out? Like, because and then we could have the like, oh, did you need the extra features from panels? Install the panels module for backdrop layouts.
Panels leftovers.
Yeah.
I'd really prefer that we rename space that so that it makes sense in today's context rather than looking backwards, say like, layout extra conditions or something like that, or layout extras,
Okay.
It strikes me that the dashboard is kind of a subset of a fairly large area of usability that opens up for just customizing administrative interfaces. I mean, people don't customize user interfaces, administrative user interfaces all that much, but I mean, they should. like that. That's actually an important thing. So it'd be nice to have that as an option.
I think currently a lot of things in our administrative interfaces are hard coded, so we can't really move them around that much.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
know.
I think maybe we need to move on from this one. We've got a couple more things to get through and only a couple minutes to get through it. If it's okay, I'll skip the next one, but I'll make a note of it that there's an issue that's garnering some discussion about changing the default homepage from /user to /node if the user removes the default homepage, which is home. That issue is 3343.
One question on that, Nate. Do you remember when it was changed to user and if that was done intentionally from Node? I don't remember.
I don't remember quite when that was.
Okay.
It might have been done when Node module was optional, and so like the testing profile needs a home page that isn't /node because /node isn't turned on in the testing profile. That might be it. It might have also been that maybe we were hoping to get rid of /node, at some point entirely. But I checked the code base and it's not deprecated, so it doesn't seem that if we did decide that, it wasn't reflected in the code base.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh boy, there's so many things. A details HTML element, issue 5090. Oh, that one was discussed in the previous meeting.
Yeah, I think the one question, I don't know, Greg, if you know the answer to this already, was do we need a polyfill? Are you sure we need a polyfill for that? Did you want that answered, or do we know?
Well, it would be good to have it since we say
Okay.
we still support. Do we still say that we support older browsers or best efforts?
We don't support Internet Explorer 8.
No, I mean 9 and above. That's what I meant.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
no.
I don't think we have an official policy on that, although we should, because it's probably time to update things considering Microsoft doesn't even support Internet Explorer at this point. So yeah. Our compatibility has stretched further than than is reasonable, apparently.
Yeah, I think that the stats now are like 98% of the internet uses Chrome or something like that, a ridiculous amount. So we're talking about a fraction of the 2% of the internet.
Okay, I will open the PMC issue and we can talk about it there.
Yes, let's do that. Having said that, there's developing countries that are still stuck on Windows XP and government agencies that are stuck in Windows XP, or schools or things like that. So just putting it out there.
Yeah, a lot of healthcare companies as well. Like I used to work at a healthcare company here in Las Vegas, and I did IT, and we had to maintain an exact point release of Internet Explorer 9 in order to access records at one of the hospitals. And it was a disaster, but we had to do it.
On behalf of all healthcare professionals, we don't change, okay? We stay the same.
Because it wasn't even the healthcare professionals who wanted to do it. It was like the IT department at this one hospital just didn't want to update their infrastructure. And they were running like an old ASP server for their medical records.
How do we load polyfills? Like, do we have an example in core of something like that, or would it be something like the way that jQuery is being loaded, or does it need to be conditionally loaded when in pages that use that, or always?
It depends. I think we might have the HTML5 shim is still in there, which
yes,
is
that's right.
specifically for
that.
Internet Explorer. And actually, depending on the outcome of that Internet Explorer discussion, like that would mean that we might remove that shim because that only exists for Internet Explorer.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I'll have a look at that. Thanks.
Let's see. On the category of things that I just will mention in passing, this there's a long-standing symlink problem that if you symlink the backdrop web root, then the module updater will fail to update modules. It's issue 3008, 3008. This issue has been coming along nicely. Indigo Zala and the author of the pull requests, hang on, it's Brad Bulger, have been knocking back and forth a lot of suggested approaches, and I think that they've landed on one that seems to fix everything. So the latest pull request looks pretty promising from Brad there, and so I'm hoping that that will reach conclusion here shortly.
Nate, have you seen that there's also a new PR of Indigo Sailor?
No, I haven't. Can you elaborate on that, Olaf?
So it's a bit hard for me because it's a very technical issue, but it's a much more smaller PR, so a 3-liner. And so I can cite from the comment of Indigo Sailor. She says it only covers the problem backdrop root is a symlink and doesn't bother any other symlinks. And this might not fix all possible problems with symlinks, but fixes the one we're struggling with so long now.
Oh yeah, how about that? I had not seen this version. Interesting.
And yeah, I think it's also interesting because you a time ago said that it would be good to keep the current behavior in addition to the new behavior, where either the destination directory is a symlink or the entire web root. And so I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, but I guess Indigo Sailor chose another approach here.
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, I think actually, I could be wrong about this, but I think Brad's latest pull request also is the old behavior and the new behavior both. So now it looks like we have two approaches that both may provide the new behavior that is actually the current behavior that's there and the previous 777 behavior, which is what we're trying to solve. So yeah, it's interesting that Indigo Zealous is so much simpler and solves the primary use case just as well. I think maybe I'll need to read this issue and see if Brad and Indigo Zella can reach a compromise or a conclusion on their own, because I would love it if one or the other would say, let's go with your pull request, if they both solve the problem in different ways. Because I don't really have a preference for implementation one versus the other, I don't think, as long as they both can be confirmed and tested that they work. So I think what I'd like to see is one or the other say, let's use your pull request.
I'll just, Indigo Zella asked to put this on the agenda, and I think her hope was that she would get direct core committer feedback. So it could be that that's what they're looking, they're reluctant to decide because they want to know from a core committer. And maybe you just gave it, and maybe that's all the feedback she needed was.
Yeah, Indigo Zealous is a lot easier to understand, and so I can provide the feedback on that right away, saying, oh yeah, that looks like it would be adequate. And if Brad is happy with that, then let's go with Indigo Zealous because it's really easy to understand. However, Brad's, I think, is more comprehensive in that it deals with symlinks everywhere, nested anywhere within the backdrop root. And so that may be preferable because it's a comprehensive fix. But I haven't tested and read through his implementation because it's a little bit more gnarly to wrap your head around. So I think Brad's would be preferable if we can get it confirmed and working, confirmed and tested, if it's a comprehensive fix. And if we just want something that fixes the immediate problem, then let's go with Indigo Zealous. So that's kind of my take on that. Yeah. So if Brad's happy with Indigo Zealous, that's the fastest way forward. And if Indigo Zealous wants complete fix, reviewing Brad's would be a different option.
And also, I think manual testing is needed as a next step. So if anyone wants to help with it, because both PRs in the current state aren't confirmed that they really fix the problem.
Yeah, and we can have ZenCI confirm the problem by updating the ZenCI script that runs the test. I think Brad's actually does change the ZenCI script, Indigo Zealous does not, but we could temporarily change the script either way that is set up in Brad's pull request to check both ways that are confirmed, or you can set it up locally. But it definitely is confusing setting up all these symlinks all over the place to actually test the problem. Well, anyway, I hope that answers things. Let's see, we still have more. Let's see, let's actually skip down. We have GitHub Actions that's continuing to come along. We'll skip over that though for today. One issue that I still would love to see in 1.20 is the media library dialog. We're still trying to get that file name filter exposed, issue 3293. I think we have the time, we have the approaches that we have gotten really close to working in this one. So I think that 3293 is a matter of checking the approaches we have, resolving any last issues with it, and then deciding which approach we want to do. I think Andy, you posted a comment saying, hey, we had one that was working a long time ago, maybe we should just go with that, even though it's not like a comprehensive fix. And I think that's that's an option that's on the table too. I'd love to see all views filters working if we can get there, because it seems like we're really close. But if we needed to compromise for 120 and use the kind of halfway fix, I'd be kind of okay with that.
Yeah, that comment was me giving up essentially. I spent a while looking at that, and the jQuery, the jQuery has never been my friend in the first place, but I think it's really hard to try and figure this thing out. I give up. So looking back, I think to solve this specific problem about being able to filter for files, then just that autocomplete field, that sounded brilliant. Somebody else is going to have to try and figure out how to get all views fields to work. I've tried. It's hard.
Yeah, well, thank you for your efforts there. And yeah, if it comes down to it, we may do exactly that, go back to that partial fix. Let's see, and lastly, I want to talk about telemetry. Issue 285 is the big meta issue. There's been a lot of activity on this in the last week. Big thanks to Doc Lamont for doing the reviewing on that, checking it out. It looks like HerbDuel also came through and re-reviewed a couple of times as well. And this issue now, it seems like people are in agreement that this looks good for core inclusion. We've had it code reviewed now by multiple people, which is awesome. I had hoped to get the project module portions merged into project and deployed this past week, but I'm sorry that I didn't get that together. But I think that we're now even more confident than we were before that this looks all ready to go. So next step here is to get project module changes merged in so that telemetry and core actually has something to communicate with. We could
I did have a look at that as well, and it looks perfectly fine. Just one, I'll do a PR to project module, just a couple little things that I found as well.
Okay.
We're still adding it in core disabled. That's the plan, right? That's the plan.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit too. That this could be a fuzzy zone. that if we put telemetry in core and have it disabled, we could use this period in between feature freeze and release to finesse what it looks like when it's enabled, or when on new installs or something like that. I don't think that that's a big ask. And so I think that we could possibly use that window to do any final finessing as far as announcing that it's there, or maybe even leave it off by default, but add a checkbox during the installer, something, to better expose telemetry module to end users.
Does this mean we're not worrying about putting it in as hidden first before it's disabled?
That's what I meant. I actually meant hidden.
Oh,
because
yeah. What do you think, Jen?
I don't know. I got excited.
Yeah, I personally don't think it needs to be hidden.
Okay.
Because it doesn't do a whole lot,
Yeah.
honestly. And the
don't
risk
think
is
that-
really low. And I think that it exposes like adequately, like here's the information you're giving up. It's pretty clear about all of its consequences.
I don't
Yeah,
think that any of us actually has any reservations. Like, we're happy to put it there. It was because we thought that we had reservations that we sort of like said, let's add it as hidden. We're more than glad to.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
I don't have any reservations.
Recommending it under an overabundance of caution, or it's like, well, if we have to put it in core, we could put it in as hidden if anyone's worried about it. And then, but if no one's worried about it, I recommend disabled. Yeah, that'd be great.
Nate,
Yep.
Nate, are you suggesting that by feature freeze, we have it committed but disabled, but that we work on the UI and could potentially enable it before the actual?
Yeah.
Or at least give
launch?
the option to enable it in the installer. Yeah, maybe we don't enable it by default, but maybe we expose it somehow.
Got
Surface it somehow to the end user saying, could you please turn this on? Or but the nice thing is for existing sites, the existing sites problem, I think maybe we should hold off on, like, hey, if you have an existing site, turn on this module. We'd like it if you did that. I think that shouldn't be at this phase. I think that we should do that probably in the next release. Yeah, sounds like everybody likes that idea. So, okay. Well, we're not super over time, but we're running over. Does anyone have any last thoughts or anything else they'd like to bring up before we close?
I'll just say, Olaf, hang around for a minute if you want to talk about nodeless content types after the meeting.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Well, let's close for today then. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for all of your work this past week and always. Yeah, this is definitely the most exciting part of a release, and looks like this one is no exception. That the flurry of activity. And it was mentioned before the recording that we were talking about code sprints this weekend. Depending on how things shake out, there's a good chance that I'll be available most of tomorrow and hopefully most of Monday. So this weekend will be a good weekend for opportunities. Tim, you had suggested just if somebody is doing actively, like setting aside time, that start up a chat, or sorry, a Jitsi or a Zoom or something like that, put it into Zulip, and then anybody that wants to join can. And I think that we'll probably be doing a little bit of that this weekend. Code freeze itself isn't actually until Wednesday, so we actually have a little bit of time after the weekend as well.
Yeah, we usually start a channel that says 120 sort of like release sprints, and then anyone can just jump in at any time and say, hey, I'm currently working for like an hour or two or whatever, and then others can jump in.
And we did designate 11 to 4 p.m. Pacific time this Saturday. Some of us will be online, and there will be. So that's a designated time, but people can work anytime and open up other spaces.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I've got to drop, and yeah, thank you, and we'll end the broadcast. So thanks.
Thanks
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Fine.